All right, 77 days to go until Election Day, and new claims from Donald Trump that the race is rigged, and new calls for his supporters to watch voting places on Election Day.
You've got to get every one of your friends. You've got to get every one of your family. You've got to get everybody to go out and watch and go out and vote. And when I say watch, you know what I'm talking about, right?
All right, I want to bring back our panel. Donald Trump supporter Kayleigh McEnany is back. Plus, we have Hillary Clinton supporter Edward Espinoza, executive director of Progress Texas. CNN political analyst and national political reporter for the New York Times, Alex Burns, is with us, and Doug Heye is back as well. Edward, you're the new guy, so let me start with you. When Donald Trump says, when I say watch, you know what I'm talking about, what do you think he's talking about?
Well, I'm not sure I ever know what Donald Trump is talking about, and I'm not even sure if some of his followers do. But when he's talking about rigged elections, let's look at what the landscape is like. States like Ohio, Florida, Nevada, they all have Republican governors. They all have Republican legislators. Who are his voters worried about running the elections in those states? Aside from the fact that there's no rigging going on, it would take something like tens of thousands of polling places to have to be rigged for this to alter an election. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm not even sure he understands how this process works.
Kayleigh, do you know what he's talking about?
I do. I mean, there are documented cases of voting fraud in this country, and it doesn't take tens of thousands of polling places. In fact, it takes a few hundred votes, as we saw down in Florida. That election, back in 2000.
Was that rigged?
No, I don't think it was rigged, but I'm making the point that these elections are close, and there are documented cases out in L.A. of dead people already on the rolls to vote. There are cases where people will call your home, and if they find out you're not voting, they'll show up in your place, and you don't have to have a piece of identification, so they just give your name and can vote. He's encouraging people to be vigilant, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
There are people who see a racial element to this. Look, he started this in Pennsylvania, and he was essentially saying, look at Philadelphia, where the people have been claiming that there were voter issues before, Alex, and he was saying, go out and watch there. Is that part of the overtone here?
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, specifically the Pennsylvania speech that you're talking about, where he said, in certain parts of the state, this is something that happens. That is pretty clearly not even a particularly coded message. His supporters do know what he's talking about. I do think it's sort of just from a political standpoint an odd message to be delivering at this point in the campaign when it really is not a particularly close race, right? That if it was neck and neck and Trump was trying to fire up his supporters to actually turn out by saying we've got to vote because if it's close the Democrats will steal it, that would be one thing. But in a situation where you're trailing pretty consistently in national and state polls by sizable margins, it'd be really tough to walk out of an election day where you lose by 5 to 10 points and you say that it was rigged. And I think you do risk actually, and I know other Republicans are concerned about this, you do risk discouraging people from voting if you start delivering the message 2.5 months out that it's rigged anyway.
Hey, Doug, I want to shift to the issue of race in general here. And again, I look at you as a Republican veteran. You are a veteran of the Republican autopsy, as it were, which after the 2012 election said the Republicans needed to do a better job or a more concerted effort and outreach to minority voters. I want to listen to the type of thing Donald Trump's been saying on the stump. We've heard it now for a few nights, and have you comment after we listen. Let's listen.
It is a disaster the way African Americans are living in many cases, and in many cases the way Hispanics are living. And I say it with such a deep felt feeling. What do you have to lose? I will straighten it out. I'll bring jobs back. We'll bring spirit back. We'll get rid of the crime. You'll be able to walk down the street without getting shot.
Now, when the Republican autopsy in 2012 called for outreach, Doug, is this, Donald Trump is talking about minority issues there. Is this the way you want it done?
No, in fact, it was not just about outreach. It was also about talking to those voters and how you talk to them, with tone being massively important to that. And so Donald Trump will say on one day, I'm going to get 95% of the African-American vote in 2020, and then uses this rhetoric. And this matters electorally. I'm from North Carolina, as I've probably said a dozen times with you, John. North Carolina has a high percentage of African-American voters, and they're organized. They were organized for Barack Obama, certainly in 2008, 2012. The HBCUs, 11 historically black colleges, are going to be turnout machines for Hillary Clinton. Rhetoric like this only plays into Donald Trump, or only plays into Clinton's hands. And also, when you talk about poll watching, I've done poll watching in states throughout the country. most of what that isn't about voter fraud or anything like that. It's about seeing who's voted so you can send those call lists back to the county or the precinct headquarters and make phone calls to get people at the polls at the last minute. And what we know, and this is how you rig an election, you don't have the kind of apparatus necessary to do that. I received an email from the Donald Trump campaign today that listed me as a big league Donald Trump supporter, which I don't know how they made that mistake. But more importantly, it said they have 77 days to build the national organization that'll move grassroots efforts for the Trump campaign. 77 days is not enough. They won't be able to do it. And so you can have people watching the polls, but how do you then have those phone calls made in county and local headquarters to get those voters out? Donald Trump does not have that.
Ed, what Donald Trump is saying, albeit in language that Doug doesn't approve of, and other Democrats, not Doug's not a Democrat, but plenty of Democrats don't approve of, is he is talking about issues that he thinks are important to minority communities here. Republicans talking about minority issues, do you see that as something that could be helpful to them?
In general, yes. Specifically in this case, no. Because the problem is that Donald Trump may be the worst validator on these issues for the Republican Party, for any entity in a generation. This guy goes out and says, what have you got to lose by voting for me, after months of beating up on the Latino community, on kicking African Americans out of his rallies. He has no relationship with these communities. So when he says, what have you got to lose, the answer in the minds of these voters is probably quite a bit.
Kaylee, you want to get in on this last word?
I do. I mean, he is advocating for changing of the status quo. The Democratic Party has failed the African-American community. Don't take it from me. Take it from Tavis Smiley. Take it from Cornel West, people in the black community who have said this about President Barack Obama. And Donald Trump has done a fantastic job because we focus on that one statement he made, but the other 90% of his speech was not what do you have to lose, but what do you have to gain. With me, you have school choice to gain. With me, I'm going to bring trade jobs back here. I'm going to bring $2 trillion abroad and give it to African-American business owners. He mentioned all of this in his speech, but, you know, I understand Democrats wanting to focus on the one comment.
Alex,
I agree with Haley. Focus on those issues all day long, and that would help Trump and other Republicans who want to talk about real issues.
Alex, I just want 15 seconds or less. Do you think the target is minority voters here?
I think the target is to make Donald Trump seem like a somewhat more mainstream candidate. I think Trump himself may believe that he can win black votes, may be able to win Hispanic votes. I think that strategists around him and in the Republican Party in general would be satisfied if he just made himself a little bit less radioactive with suburban mainstream white voters.
All right, guys, thanks so much.